What if I told you that there was an ancient learning method that was once popularized by Julius Caesar that was so powerful that he forbid his guards from telling any of the slaves about this special technology? Hi, this is Dr. Dan Langley, and welcome to another episode of Eye-Opening Discussions. If you're ready to question everything that you think that you know in order to unlock your true purpose and unleash your full potential, then you've come to the right place. Join us as we dive deep into eye-opening discussions. This method that I'm talking about here is the Trivium method. Now, this is a classical form of learning where one learns how to learn, but they also learn how to think as well. The way that I look at the Trivium is that it's broken down into three parts. I call it kind of the what, the why, and the how. But classically, it's called knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. The knowledge part is about data, facts, information, and we call that knowledge. The understanding of that part is kind of like the processing of the acquired knowledge. And the wisdom portion of this part is just the application of the acquired and understood knowledge. So the first aspect of the Trivium is what we call knowledge. And so you may have heard that the adage or the axiom, knowledge is power. And in this sense, it is definitely true. From one certain perspective, we live in an absolutely full reality or a full universe where the ether is chock full of information, full of data, or full of knowledge, if you would say. And our ability to accept that knowledge, or our ability to simply say, no, I don't really want to participate in that knowledge, will really determine the first crucial step in harnessing our ability to focus or to be conscious. If we are in a sea of infinite knowledge and information, then how do we then act on that information? One way might be to simply choose of all the infinite items that we could focus our conscious on, to just simply pick an item to focus our consciousness on. And in that simple act, we take the infinite potential of our consciousness and focus it into the first step of the Trivium method. Another aspect of this that it's also commonly called is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, or from a computer standpoint, it's input, processing, and output. And so you can see here that the information that is available, if it's acquired, then this is the input into the machine there. If we simply decide that there's information or data or facts that we find too offensive or alarming for some reason, and we simply say, I'm going to choose to ignore that information, or I'm not going to accept that information, then you can see how we could be at advantage because we wouldn't be acquiring the knowledge that we need to make to create power. And as we said earlier, knowledge is power. And you can see how in times of government or control that the limiting of knowledge or information to their people would create a power differential. Those who were in the know, who literally had the knowledge, had much more power than those who did not. They could sway public opinion. They could influence them to do things that the public may not do if they were fully in the know or if they had the knowledge that was available. And so again, to get back to the first aspect of knowledge is just to kind of understand what facts and data and knowledge even is. And so there are many definitions of what knowledge is. And so for the sake of clarity of this discussion here, I'm talking about just information, data that we have access to. So this would be the who, the what, the where, and the when. And so just simply from that level, there's an infinite sea of information that we have to choose from. Just to take the first example of the who would be then, was it you as a person or as a viewer? Is it me, the host of this podcast? And who am I? What am I? Am I just this human being or am I a multi-dimensional being? This is important to kind of differentiate between the points of information, because information is limitless and it's endless. And so to acquire as much information or as much knowledge as possible would allow you the opportunity to cultivate as much power as possible when making decisions. And so deciphering the knowledge of the who, the what, the where, and the why, and simply allowing your consciousness to be open or to focus on these little tidbits will increase your conscious awareness so that you can make the next leap into, or you can take the next step into the Trivium, which we'll talk about here shortly. But again, when we're talking about the who, the what, the where, and the when, we have to ask ourselves, what are we even talking about here as far as where do we get this information? Where do we get this knowledge? And most of us get it just from our five senses. This is classically where we get it from. So most of our information that we get is from our eyesight, and then we get more information from our hearing, from our taste buds, for olfactory senses, from smelling, and from touch. And so all this information is out there that we can collect with our five senses. And still at the same time, we can still say, well, I'm not gonna touch this stove because it's too hot. I don't need to sense that data. Or I'm not gonna look at this image because it's too grotesque or it's too frightening. Or I'm not gonna listen to this music because it is too low vibrational. Or I'm not gonna smell this garbage aroma because it's too off-putting. All this is just information that we have the ability to collect, but if we simply decide that we are going to deny accepting this knowledge, then we become ignorant in a way. We ignore that information. And if we pronounce ignorant like ignorant, then it makes a whole lot more sense. We get to choose what type of information we want to focus our attention on. And we've been taught, most of us have been taught, that there's certain things called misinformation and information that is forbidden, or we shouldn't look here or we shouldn't look there. And from one standpoint, that could be a way that they're decreasing our ability to acquire power and acquire knowledge. And so simply having an awareness of that first step is that the more information, the more facts, the more knowledge that we can decide to acquire and be aware of, the more likely it is that we can build power inside ourselves. And even if we do agree to perceive the information from our five senses, this is still only about 1% of the sense of the information that's in the field that we exist in. If we're talking about the electromagnetic spectrum, maybe 0.00035% is visible light. The other 99% of the information that we have access to are radio waves, microwaves, infrared, ultraviolet, Wi-Fi, and X-rays and gamma rays. So you can see how the space that we're in is infinitely full of information, and our ability to be aware of that information will definitely help us in cultivating the type of power that we need to create the type of reality that we're looking for. And it seems somewhat unfortunate that at one time in our history, we were taught the Trivium method. And now we're almost taught kind of the opposite of the Trivium method, in that we're taught not to accept information, but we're taught to deny information. We're taught to ignore it. We're taught to say, well, you're forbidden to say this information, or you're forbidden to say this information over here. And what that simply does is limits our knowledge that we're able to acquire. And sometimes they censor radio, they censor the information that's out there for us, and they say it's for our own good. But you have to ask yourselves, is the information, the knowledge that they're hiding from us, intentionally hiding from us, is it for our own good, or is it for the good of the people who want power? And so being aware that this power differential is being created by those who currently have power, we should ask ourselves, do we want to be at the mercy of the people who know, the people who have the knowledge, or do we want to remain ignorant or ignorant in our lives and kind of suffer the consequences? Because either way, the law of cause and effect, as we spoke about in an earlier episode, is immutable. The cause of our suffering is usually self-inflicted, and that's a hard one for most of us to understand. However, the more information that we have, the less ignorant we'll be, and the less likely we'll be suffering due to our own ignorance. So we can see that the very first step of the trivium, which is the acquisition of knowledge, is a crucial first step. If we decide to accept information and take it in and allow our awareness to be permeated with this information, there will be a much better place than if we simply decide to ignore the information. So I hope that you understood how important that the first step in the trivium is that we are surrounded by a sea of information at all times. Information that we might not be able to sense with our five senses. But that doesn't mean that we can't accept it. There are other aspects such as intuition and even further developed senses that if we're made aware of these, that we can exercise those faculties and gain even more knowledge and information than we have before. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the first aspect of the trivium, where knowledge is definitely power. And I remember an old G.I. Joe cartoon that would say, well, and now I know, and knowing's half the battle. So we'll see you next time on Eye-Opening Discussions.